The first step in managing your emotional triggers is learning to spot them. So I'm going to share with you some ways that you can do that so that you can better understand your triggers and start to manage them. Because if you can't see your triggers, then they control you. I'm Nicola, and my passion is helping parents and not yet parents release their stuff so they don't pass it on to their kids and repeat the cycle. And I've been finding ways to release my patterns of pain for over 25 years. So what exactly are emotional triggers? I want to use some examples to illustrate what it looks like to be emotionally triggered. Let's say you've had a really long day, you're tired, you're kind of just over everything, and your partner asks you a relatively innocent question like, what are you doing? Or have you done the dishes? Or have you put the bins out? And before you know it, you're in full-fledged attack mode, yelling, screaming, blaming, accusing, angry as all get out. Or maybe you've spent days at work working on a major project. You've pulled it all together, you've worked overtime, you've got this project done, you presented it to the team, and it seemed like it went really well. And then a colleague points out a typo in one of your slides, and instantly you're in a negative death spiral of self-talk, blame, recrimination, shame, and before you know it, you've decided you should probably just quit your job and give up. Or an example from my own life, I have a real trigger around being ignored. So if my husband either talks over me or just doesn't listen to what I say, I get angry in an instant. And it's really a strong reaction compared to the severity of what he's just done. But being ignored is a real trigger for me. Welcome to the world of emotional triggers. So basically, an emotional trigger is a strong reaction to something. It can be positive or it can be negative, but when we're talking about it in this context, we're usually talking about negative emotional reactions. So it's a strong emotional reaction. And it can be triggered by anything. It could be an object, a person, a place, a memory, an event, a smell, something you saw, something you heard. It could be any number of things that can trigger this. And when we are triggered, it takes us back to a past experience. We're suddenly no longer able to access our current adult capabilities or our experiences, and instead we go back to our old reactions and our old coping mechanisms, which usually aren't very effective and can sometimes be even harmful. But that's where the trigger takes us back to. And we're just really not functioning very well in that moment because we don't know what just happened and we're just in full click whir mode, to quote Maxwell Maltz from Psycho-Cybernetics, the idea that this tape plays that just takes over and we have this automatic response to whatever just triggered us. And in that situation, it would be kind of nice to be able to soothe yourself. So I'll put a link to a guide with a list of quick ways to regulate your emotions when you are triggered. So how do we identify our emotional triggers? Well, there's two main parts to this. The first part is recognizing the reaction that we have, and the second part is digging into the underlying causes. So firstly, we need to look at when we're triggered. What does that look like? We need to notice our patterns, our reactions. And generally, we're looking for strong emotional reactions. And we have a phrase for this. We describe someone as having a hair trigger around a particular issue, or that their reaction is explosive. So we're describing that intensity and the suddenness of that response. And it's generally describing an over-the-top or an out-of-proportion response. The intensity of that reaction really isn't justified by what just happened. There's something else going on. And it's not just anger or rage or irritation that can happen. We might feel scared. We might feel panicky for no reason. We might have an urge to run away. Maybe have a sudden mood change out of nowhere. Maybe we feel out of control or overwhelmed. Any of these things that just suddenly take over our awareness can indicate that we've been triggered emotionally. And the triggers aren't just emotional. We can also notice physical experiences. Maybe we've got tension in our body. We're grinding our teeth or clenching our fists. Or maybe we've got a headache or our neck is suddenly stiff and inflexible. We're experiencing changes physically. And we can also experience mental symptoms of being triggered, like repetitive thoughts, like worrying about something that 2 minutes ago wasn't bothering us at all, rehashing conversations over and over, trying to find ways that we could have done that better or said that differently. Or the big one, which is a spiral of negative self-talk, where our inner critic just flares up and is completely out of control, telling us what we did wrong, what's going to go wrong, and everything that's wrong with everything everywhere. The second part is to understand what just happened. What is the underlying cause of the situation that caused us to be triggered. How did we get here? And we're not looking for judgment or shame or blame here. We're trying to do this out of curiosity from as neutral a place as possible. What we want is a factual description of what just happened, not an interpretation. For example, a factual description might be he put his wet towel on the bed, whereas an interpretation might be, once again, he showed his complete disregard for the tidiness of the bedroom. That's interpretation. So we're trying to be as neutral and factual as possible, just trying to understand what came immediately before this experience of feeling strongly triggered. And as you explore this, you'll probably find that there are layers underneath. So you can ask things like, okay, what's under this? What came before this? What is driving this feeling? So maybe we're feeling angry on the top, but underneath there's fear. And maybe further down we have anxiety or a fear of abandonment, or any number of things can be in those layers. And if we go, the further we go down, the better we understand the trigger and the less it's likely to impact us in future. We can also look at patterns, behaviours, experiences we've had over the past and say, I've noticed that in these situations, this is how I tend to respond. And then we can use those patterns of behaviour and response to better understand what's causing us to be triggered. And if we go back far enough, we might even be able to trace it back to its origin by asking questions like, when was the first time I felt this way? Or what can I remember, often from our childhood? What can I remember happened in my childhood that led me to feel this way about this kind of situation? It's not always logical or sensible, and that's not the point here. We're not trying to find things that make sense, because this is emotional. We're looking for the trigger and the response. What happened in the past that led us to associate this thing happening with the necessity of this reaction? So what we're aiming for is to get to know our triggers so that we can minimize the intensity of those reactions, but also start to manage them so they don't damage our relationships, our job, our well-being, or any of the other things that are important to us. So start to recognize when you're triggered. Dig in so that you can better understand those responses, and then you'll be able to find ways to better manage those triggers so they don't impact you quite as much. And then once you've identified those triggers, you're going to want to start looking at ways to release them out of your system so they don't affect you again in the future. And I've got a guide with my favourite techniques for releasing emotional issues, which I'll link to in the description for you, and you can download that and learn some of these techniques that you might be able to use to weaken the hold of this trigger on you. And if you want a simple technique to help you sit with these uncomfortable emotions as they arise, you might find this video helpful. And I'll see you in the next one.